All right, welcome. We're going to just get the broadcast up and running here and let everybody in, and then in a few minutes we'll get started. All right, it's 10 o'clock Eastern Time, August 25th, and we're going to kick off our first ever virtual cloud, it's a virtual summit, Cloud Advantage Virtual Summit. There you go. I stumbled on that one. Sorry, marketing team. We're excited to have you here with us today. We have, over the next 2 days, we have an action-packed, filled with a whole bunch of different sessions. We have customer sessions, we have demos, we have talks by Rob Strechay, who you'll be hearing in a few minutes. We have Rebecca Weekly from Geico giving her perspective on the world. A ton of great content packed into really, 5 hours each of these next 2 days. It's really exciting for me to, introduce the next person, Rob Strechay, who's going to kick us off the keynote. It was 2 years ago. We were on stage chatting with each other about a very different topic on a very different company that we're not going to talk about today. Where I think we were in Las Vegas. It was a lot hotter there. I'm glad to be at my house, a lot more comfortable here. But the world has changed a lot in the last 2 years, and that's crazy to say in a technology world, especially like infrastructure and virtualization and cloud that's been around for some time. So without further ado, I welcome my friend Rob Strechay to the virtual stage here to give us a little bit of a landscape and perspective on where the cloud world sits right now.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. I think it's a lot of fun to be here. And as we kind of talked about, leading up to this, I am not in Las Vegas myself. I am up in Massachusetts today in a nice, much cooler setting, and I go to Vegas enough, so I'm happy to be home. Out of the bunker today and here with you all. I think one of the things that I've learned over the last 10 to 15 years is that betting against hybrid cloud and multi-cloud is really a mistake. It really did start out as a hybrid cloud was an accident. Maybe you found yourself with multiple cloud providers, multiple service providers, and it happened just organically. A lot of different divisions, maybe paying with a credit card, and we all hear the stories of going down that path. But really, hybrid cloud has gone from accidental to intentional in many ways, shapes, or forms. I think one of the things that really is key is that when you start to go out, you go to things like Reddit and you start to pull things around, you can see that really the changing landscape. As John was referencing, when the acquisition happened of VMware, it did cause a little pause to everybody to start to reinvent that. VMware is not going anywhere. I mean, again, it's, everybody who's picked the demise of the mainframe, funny enough, where I started my career out, hasn't gone anywhere either. And in fact, plays a very big role in things like hybrid clouds. When you start to talk to the folks in the community, it's really a lot about the changes in licensing and stuff like that. VMware, again, is still a good platform, but when you start to look at it, there's many others that have over the last 10 years really come up and become comparable to VMware and that. And one of the others will be on later on today with Nutanix. Again, when you start to look at how the alternatives that are out there, and we'll kind of talk through some of that as well as we go through, because there is a big open source push as well for managing these systems. So you can kind of think of the layer stack of hybrid cloud as really evolving over the last 10 years. And that massive enthusiasm for open source technologies like Kubernetes, this isn't accidental. It's a response to needing more flexibility, more innovation, and frankly, more freedom from the underlying infrastructure, be it on-prem, in the cloud, or in your service providers. And a lot of people are looking at containerization and virtualization as kind of being hand in hand, because not every VM fits as a container, and not every container should be a VM. So again, when you start to look at it, there's different things that go into consideration when you're looking at hybrid cloud. One of the things you can see is kind of when the licensing changes happened. This is ETR. ETR is a research, enterprise tech research, ETR.ai, good plug for them. Their technology spending intention survey that they do quarterly, you can see that between April and July of 2024, this pervasion, VMware lost 10% of their pervasion in that time space. And why is that? Nomenclature really interesting? They did a lot last year with their value-added reseller network, with their service provider network, and they really focused on their top accounts, the top 4,000, 5,000 of their accounts. That isn't by mistake, that is by design. And I think when you start to look at all of the others started to rise up above where VMware is. Now you can see VMware's, this here is what we call net score. Net score is a measure of propensity to buy or buying intentions. The lower you are, the less apt you are to buy from that vendor. The higher you are on that list, like Nutanix, which is up here in the 20s, and Red Hat with OpenShift is up in the high teens here. You can see that they're significantly higher, with VMware being at -20 at the moment. So again, it's one of these things when this is across over 1,300 surveillance that they go out to. These are CIOs, directors of IT, major corporations, all the way to Global 2000. And when you start to see the propensity to buy has really gone off a cliff for that. Not surprising. Again, they're skinnying down their aperture of who is going to be a customer, and they're really focused on that. We've seen this a number of times, not just in paid for licensing, but you can see it other places as well. And I'll kind of talk to that in a second. But when I take a step back and I take a breath and I say, the fastest growing areas of infrastructure isn't virtualization anymore. I think we know what virtualization is, and I think you'll hear about it. It's really around container management. It's container orchestration and container platforms. When you look at all of the surveys that were, respondents to the survey that were put out there, and you start to take a step back from this ETR thesis data from July, so really fresh data from last month, you start to take a step back and see where are companies really investing. That 40% line is really kind of a line of demarcation within an industry. It basically says anything above that is well exceeding and being quote unquote over invested, or they're pouring money into. Things below that will suffer because they're using money to go over on those higher ups. So not surprisingly, ML and AI, leads the list. But even there, you can see it's come down as the pervasion, or how many people are spending on it in this survey at a certain level, starts to move further to the right, which is, you can see cloud computing's up in the 70% range, where most have significant spend there. You can also see that there is a number of other things out there as well. So I think, again, when you start to look at where cloud is going and hybrid cloud is going, orchestration is definitely part of it, a big part of it. So I think when we start to look at this leveling of the field here, and we start to look at where you may be investing in, one of the reasons containers and container management and orchestration has become so hot is the open source market and has really focused in. But you also have things like OpenStack, you have the OpenShift, which is the Kubernetes from Red Hat. You have Nutanix has their what was a AHV with their stack on top of that. And you have a number of others out there as well, like CloudStack, and you have another couple of others of vendors out there in this market. So again, when you start to look at it, it's not just about VMs anymore. Really, you're looking at it because a lot of AI ML is actually containerized at this point. So when you go and look at OpenAI and people like that, when they're out there training their models, they're actually doing that on Kubernetes in a big way. So some of the largest AI ML shops use containers because they're very easy, portable. You can put security around them, but it does take a little bit of knowledge of how to do that. So you need a good partner to come with you on that. So again, when you start to look at all of these pieces coming together, you're going to see, hey, information security is way, over on this right side here. Well, again, when I look at it that way, I say, hey, that is an interesting, thing because everybody's doing information security. But what you can see is AI ML is moving this way. You can see container orchestration and management is moving this way. And cloud computing's and this is kind of like, the large public hyperscalers is kind of, circling in a way. So investment has kind of gotten to where it is and will probably stay there, if not grow in pervasion. So again, lots going on within the hybrid cloud market. A little bit about myself. I did work at Amazon. I did go and build a hybrid service. One of the jackets to prove that there are hybrid parts of Amazon. But when you start to look at it, we delved into the fact that a big pain point for people was really around networking and how do you move your data and where does data live. Now you have data residency and a number of other things that will really start to lead the way. But one thing to take away from this is it's not all about VMs anymore. It's about how all of the above architecture works together. So some more data from their July thesis. When I was, talking to some folks about this, I was like, okay, hybrid multi-cloud is really one of the things that makes a lot of sense and always has been for me. Most organizations have a lot of data to the point where 85% of the data that organizations want to use for AI is actually on premise. So when you start to look into where this is going and how people are, dealing with this, they may want to use tool chains that are part of a service. They may want to use Git or want to use a PaaS or a IaaS service. And I think a lot of that becomes, hey, what do I want to manage and what do I not want to manage? And what do I, not even have the skill sets to manage? So security, again, is always number one when you look at where they're prioritizing their spend. Obviously, 59% said they're prioritizing within, advanced cybersecurity and zero trust architectures. Next was AI-powered automation, intelligent decisioning. You can think of the FICOs of the world and the others that are in that space. You have also a lot of the things that fit underneath that, the AI models and all the agentic workflows, but there's a lot of open source in that as well, and a lot of skill sets needed. Third on the list is hybrid cloud and edge computing, because funny enough, that's where the data actually lives. And a lot of organizations are saying, hey, we want to be able to have the data and be able to now, again, activate that data. We need to do that in a hybrid manner. Funny enough, I need connections, I need networking, I need security that helps across that entire plane as well. So again, a lot of these things coming together, especially when you start to look at financial services leading the way in, platform adoption, a lot of times driven by regulation, data sovereignty, and AI. From that perspective, you have healthcare and life sciences are accelerating as well. Think data pipelines, patient privacy, and hybrid deployments to get better effectiveness and resiliency. And even governments and public sector are leaning in and have leaned in a big way with service providers and hybrid because of things like focus on compliance and open standards has brought to them, and it's also helping them build out their infrastructure in a more resilient way. So again, there's a lot going on that we'll talk about as we go through this. So at the Cube Research, we also do our own research. And I think one of the studies that a colleague of mine, Paul Neshwati, did around app dev for his app dev summit, and part of that was the fact that, you know, you look at application deployment models and you start to take a step back from that and say, okay, where am I putting this? And organizations are, using more than one cloud. I mean, very few, only 5% were all in on one public cloud provider. And that to me was just, is not shocking at all, because you could have 3 or 4 by accident almost, which is what I was talking about in the beginning. Now I think it's way more intentional, where people are having 1, 2, or 3 and they're connecting them together and then looking at it. But when you start to look at the fact that only, over a large portion, or over 78%, are using 3 or more clouds. That's pretty substantial information that shows that there has to be pathways between those clouds. And I would say that a lot of this is with regional clouds, not just the hyperscalers. So people like US Signal and people like the others that are regionally have data centers in the right places to help these organizations out so that they can do things at a better cost structure as well. Standardization on IaaS and PaaS services has forced organizations kind of into this model where they're like, hey, I'm going to build using this PaaS layer or this IaaS layer for these set of applications. But again, there's still connections back to the on-premise, to the mainframes, to different sources of truth that really do that. And this has been this way for probably 5 years plus, but like I said, now it's intentional and not by accident. And we'll get to see that, again, this is one of those places where folks are, really growing up from that. So when you start to look at what is your primary, deployment model from an app development or an app deployment perspective, hybrid makes the top of the list at 54%. And the people who were actually, talked to about this was the fact that these were developers and CIOs and CTOs of organizations. So over 375 in this particular part of the survey responded to this. Different organizations of different sizes and across all different industries. So when you start to look at why that is, again, it becomes a cost thing. It may be, hey, I need to scale. I need to be able to bring data to the party that has, is my intellectual property in a lot of cases. So a lot of times they're using this, and they're using the cloud because there's expertise there in the hybrid model that they just don't have simply on premise, or can't build out on premise, or just don't want to maintain because it just from a cost effectiveness perspective, they'd rather be working at the architecture and app development layer versus at the actual IaaS or platform engineering layer. Also, multiple providers is generally not as desirable from a multi-cloud perspective. So what this means is like, hey, I'm running part of my application in AWS and part of my application in Google. That is usually not very desirable. And one of the reasons being is that there are huge fees around that. There are egress fees. I know everybody's come out and said that we're getting rid of egress fees if you move fully. And they're basically saying, yeah, if you're going to move out completely, we'll waive those egress fees. But if you're still doing day-to-day egress and you have things built across, I know a previous life, I helped an organization where one part of the organization had BigQuery, and the other part of the organization was using Redshift, and they were actually moving data between the two. And so what we actually did was we looked for a partner, such as the US Signal, that actually had peering with those, and then we were able to actually help from a transit perspective lower their costs significantly by doing that. But that was when you start to look at, hey, sometimes it's just built that way and you can't go and change it. So how do you go and be creative in how you solve for some of these? One of the other big concerns is, blast radius in these. And when I mean blast radius, when something goes wrong, what's going to happen? And what exactly gets impacted? Kind of a different way when you start to roll things out. And there were some studies in here are using canaries or using blue green deployments, and how do you deploy your applications into these hybrid and multi-cloud models, cloud native models. And when you start to look at it, at Amazon, we used canaries very extensively. And then we used phased rollouts on top of that. And you can start to look at the different best practices. If you're looking at and trying to understand blast radius, even within a single provider, if you go back and look at what happened with CrowdStrike and their rollout, that DevOps debacle that they had, where it basically was because they didn't catch it in canaries or blue green, and it started in the Asia time zone and actually made its way through Europe and then the US, where they were having issues and missed this in the beginning and could not roll back as easily. So again, it's actually a really good case study of what not to do, and I give CrowdStrike a lot of credit in the fact that they put it out there and explained exactly how it went and what they were doing to change it. But it's something that, again, when you start to look at these hybrid and multi-cloud types of deployments, you have to really take into account. But really, only 9.3% are stretching across multiple clouds. So, the use cases for hybrid and multi-cloud are plentiful. When you start to look at it, one of the top, of the list, disaster recovery and business continuity is really one of the ones that gives you flexibility across your on-prem and in the cloud. You look at cloud bursting and dynamic scaling. That's another one. So this is where, hey, I have a hybrid application, and my front end, my CDN, my other stuff, maybe I have a forward customer facing portion, is all done in the cloud. Now I can scale that out. Or, hey, I have to scale out the back end of my database because I service retail and I have Black Friday and I have, the holiday season, and then I have back to school or something of that nature. Dev test environments and flexibility. A lot of times organizations are using the tool chains that are in the cloud and using that as a place maybe they test and then bring back in or into their service provider. I would say that we've seen on-premise really move out to the service providers, regional service providers that allow them to have better scaling and better use of assets. So I think that to me is one of the things where, hey, maybe I do development, especially when you're getting into AI. We see that the tool chains and things of that nature, where you can have access to models, but then when they do that, they're bringing their models on-prem or to the edge or to colo, where they can then grow as well. Regulatory compliance and data sovereignty. This is a big issue, especially when you get into places like Europe in particular, but I wouldn't be shocked to see it come to the States as well as things start to grow with privacy and advocacy. There's a lot of laws in Europe that really, push on data sovereignty and compliance. But if you're an international company doing business over there, you know this very well because this is something you deal with on a day-to-day basis, even being a US domiciled company. And AI analytics and edge processing is going to be huge. I think that you're going to see that small language models tied with other analytics and AI are going to be coming to a location close to you. Part of that is you can't uh, change the speed of light. And there are certain things that are certain in there. You can have more bandwidth, but the speed of light and latency doesn't necessarily change. So again, when you start to look at this, a lot of AI will come to the edge. That way it can service customers. Also, you look at resiliency. So say that you're using AI at a hospital level, you definitely do not want to be beholden in a storm situation with the fact that hundreds of miles of fiber actually survive. I mean, I know U.S. Signal does a really good job with their fiber, but it's still something you want to be careful about. And I think that when you look at a self-containment and things of that nature, you're starting to get more localized data centers that help drill that out as well. And I know US Signal has a number of things going in that space as well. Benefits, obviously, cost savings. You get to actually have a broader set of portfolio from a cost perspective. A lot of people think moving to a hybrid cloud actually doesn't help you, and there's a reason why hybrid has become 54% of the investment and deploy from a deployment perspective. Scalability and elasticity. The on-demand model really is a key to a lot of this. Flexibility and choice of components. So you may be able to get things in your hybrid cloud model and multi-cloud that you cannot get on premise, or will never be able to. Like when you think of things like AI and other stuff, power is really one of the things. I mean, we're talking about the fact that AI, power, and consumption is really going to drive a renaissance in the energy and energy delivery market. But that flexibility and choice of, hey, I want to use this type of processors, these types of GPUs, I want to build it a certain way or have it built a certain way. You have that flexibility and choice. Security and compliance, I'd argue that, again, when you start to look at clouds have some of the best security and compliance because that's their job. That's what they do every day of the week. I have always said, and I was on the IT side for a while, with a major financial services company. And when you start to look at it, it's like we had 5 people on our security team at the time. When you start to look at these organizations that are building this out, they have hundreds of people that are really focused on this and helping you with that. And it becomes a key. That and the value-added resellers do a really good job of augmenting this as well. And I know we'll hear from some of them on this as well later on. And performance optimization, again, you can put the right workload at the right place at the right time. So again, when you start to look at all of these benefits together, it really makes a strong case for why it's an all of the above strategy, and hybrid makes a lot of sense. So again, taking a step back and going, why am I so bullish on open source? I'm at KubeCon a lot, and I sit there and understand that, here's where all of these organizations are going as they start down their cloud native path. And I really think KubeCon, which is KubeCon Cloud Native Con, part of the Cloud Native Foundation, really should just be called Cloud Native Con. I think, to me, Kubernetes, is really, it's over 10 years old. It would be 11. It's actually 11 years old now. When you start to look back on it, it's fairly mature. And I think, the folks at Nutanix have been contributing into that market, and others contribute into that market. But open source is winning the day, especially with AI. There's a lot more models coming out. You can see that OpenAI moved GPT to an open source model that allows you to use it. I mean, this is not by mistake, because it allows you to get scale and allows you to get comfort. It also gets you data sovereignty and a lot of other things that you can't do through using AI via API, which is not a bad thing. But again, you got to really think through the security and data privacy and what you're actually doing, how models are trained, things of that nature. When you start to look at open source, one of the things I always tell people, open source doesn't mean free. And I think that is a key. Just because there's open source models and other pieces there, really you need to take a look and say, hey, what is going to be my cost on top of open source? Because it's not like, hey, I just go pull down the Kubernetes distro from the CNCF and go use that and everything's hunky dory. There's a lot of pieces, like, how do you have expertise in service mesh? Do you understand all of the different Argo types of configuration and CI/CD pipelines and all of the different pieces that you then have to pull together? This is why Kubernetes, I'm very bullish on containers in Kubernetes, but I see it winning in a supportable manner. And I think that, again, is when you start to evaluate where you're going with hybrid cloud and what you look at it from a platform perspective, look at both, your virtualization and your container, because that's where a lot of your next gen applications, or at least will partially live. Certain things and certain workloads still fit really well in virtualized, VMs. But even now, things like KubeVirt, which is an open source project, is actually virtualizing Kubernetes, or virtualizing VMs onto Kubernetes, hence KubeVirt. And that is a program that is being supported by all of the major vendors, because, again, it makes a lot of sense. But a lot of times, it doesn't make sense to go and transition a VM, a heavyweight VM, to a container. Your mileage will vary depending on it. That's why, like, again, I'm bullish that VMs are not going anywhere, and that you should have a plan beyond VMware for diversity in your virtualization platform. Much of the innovation is happening in that open source market, especially around AI and Kubernetes. As I said, this is also where observability plays a big role in reliability, accessibility, and serviceability, or RAS. When you start to look at how you can focus, I think, again, working with your service providers on the Kubernetes layer, making it simple, push button, becomes key to that cloud delivery or cloud operating model. And then worrying about how you're going to make your applications observable. And there's years of data on this. There's the DORA report that comes out every year. There's a whole number of things. And DORA, the developer side, not DORA, the regulations in the EU, which talks about financial services, and neither of them are a cartoon character with a map. So you have to build your own map to get through all of these different pieces. So this is why hybrid has taken off, is really, again, open source is good, but it's not simple necessarily. And when you can see here, 89% of the time open source is being utilized, is not surprising, because there is a lot of open source being used. But again, it's one of those things that you have to look at. One of the keys to open source and about open source is really open source security. It's I would say we could talk about open source security for hours. This is a topic unto itself, to put it mildly. But in most cases, I would also say open source is as secure, if not more secure, than closed source, due to the transparency and how many eyeballs and how many organizations are beating upon it, and that things that are in open source can get leveraged. Now, there's always more that can be done. You'll see that with the folks later on, where they're wrapping different security layers around it for things like multi-tenancy and a whole number of other types of services that allow security to be functional going forward. But there's also a lot of supply chain attacks taking place in the open source community. Again, KubeCon back in London, back this spring, winter time frame, we were talking about this a lot, and the fact of what the open source community is doing to protect those repositories. But again, why is that? Because 50% of the concern with open source, over 50%, 50.9, is really around that security and vulnerabilities. And the nice thing is, if it's a well-maintained and a healthy ecosystem, those vulnerabilities don't stand a chance because there's so many eyeballs on it. I would say that one of the things that I usually tell folks to stay away from is when it's one single vendor is doing one single thing, one single activity. And a good example is that in the service mesh, there's a AI gateway, much like you'll hear the word MCP server, which is really an API gateway for tools underneath the hood of that AI can go and talk to, and it just knows how to talk that. There's a new AI gateway that has been accepted as of this morning by the CNCF from Solo.io. So what happens there is that you now get a larger community than just Solo.io doing it, single company where you're single threaded. It also helps with diversification of suppliers in case something does go wrong. But open source and open standards doesn't mean that everything is 100% compatible and there's no migration. I think migration between different distributions and things of that nature also tends to be one of the major concerns. It's less of a concern now that we're 11 years in with Kubernetes, but again, it is still out there and something to take into account. Now, everybody's favorite topic on this, licensing. Licensing is more than a security concern with open source. Like I said, single company dominated or something that seems too good to be true is probably true. Licensing changes happen. Like I said, it's not just closed source software companies that are, changing their licensing methodologies. This can happen to anything. I show you two examples that have happened in the last 5 years with Terraform and Elastic. And when you start to look at that, that spawned off open search for Elastic, which was supported by major vendors to kind of build out what people were using Elastic for. But to tell you the truth, Elastic has still grown. So it's not like those companies go away when there's an open source competitor to it, because there are different things and differentiation that is done to that. Then you also have with Terraform, you had something called OpenTofu, which is really compatible with that. And there's a number of companies out there supporting OpenTofu, some of the major vendors, as well as some of the minor vendors. So you can start to look at these licensing changes do have impacts, and sometimes that ends up branching or helping to branch out open source, and you have a new train with a new name that keeps going. But that can definitely change how you think about things and how you have to be careful. This is why I'm a big fan of using open source, but looking at it in a way that is actually providing the value. So it's supported in that way. So again, a key to things like Kubernetes and others and VMs is having it supported. So again, as I kind of bring this to kind of a wrap up here with the fact that, there's a lot of considerations when you start to look at this. And I kind of looked at, some of the ones that were key, and I kind of was sitting there thinking about, okay, if I was sitting there building out my applications, which I've done, I've built SaaS at a number of companies, SaaS and PaaS that were provided out to our customers. What were the different things that I needed to do from a hybrid cloud deployment? And I did a lot of hybrid cloud. I saw a lot of hybrid cloud. I helped build a lot of hybrid clouds. When you start to look at it, application locality topped the list. Determining where applications should reside or run is really a key. And this has to do not only with the cost at the bottom there, and cost does not last by any stretch of the imagination, but when you start to peel back the onion and look at application locality, really one of the things that I always consider is, hey, who am I servicing? Who's the customer? Is it an internal facing application? Okay, well, I probably want that closer to where the organization that's going to use that application is going to be. So if I'm building AI for my customer service department, my HR department, or something of that nature, I probably want it as close to that organization as possible. So I'd probably be looking for a regional data center where I can scale up and scale down and be able to build out in there that has fast links to all of the different locations where I am. Because at the end of the day, there's certain things you can't change, and networking and latency is one of them. And building where the people are really makes it. I mean, I know we're all supposed to have 5G and everything on our phone, but we're not there yet. And you'll actually see probably before that edge and AI coming to cell towers and near cell tower in regional. So regional hubs for AI that is then located near cell towers so that latency, and this is going to be done with small language models and agentic workflows, and then managed centrally and trained centrally. So again, app locality, especially in the age of AI, is going to be key, especially when you're joining AI and some of your more traditional applications together in over the next couple of years here as we learn more about how agentic workflows work to make our standard applications smarter. You'll see that as you service your customers. Workload profiling. I think this is one of the things when I looked at this, and this goes back all the way. I used to do application workload profiling for networking when people were using T1s and F1s and ISDN lines and things like that out to regional. You had to really understand the workload characteristics and requirements, not requirements, to understand really what was going on and how it works out. So I think, again, when you start to look at the requirements of an application, where does it get its data from? How does it scale? What is the architecture? Is it using APIs? Are my customers going after this via API? If you're in financial services and you have partners who are coming to your API set, okay, where is all of the data that they're getting to? Where's the front door? Where's the middle ground? And how do I, secure that? And how does that workload, profile? Like, am I sending massive amount of data? If I'm doing that, I definitely do not want to be in a public cloud. If I'm doing massive amounts of downloads and, really exiting data from a cloud, because there's a lot of different fees that you have on that. So again, networking is tough. That's why, again, partnering with somebody who has expertise in that is really key. Perpetual versus ephemeral, classifying workloads. Is this a workload that's going to run all the time, or is this something that's temporary? And again, this goes back to scaling, to understanding that workload profile. Do I need to scale up because I'm a retail? And even if it's an internal application that I need to scale up because the number of transactions, I'm bringing on more physical registers that I need to scale up how people do lookups on different SKUs, or I have to do inventory or supply chain and I have to scale that up. This becomes, is it an ephemeral problem or a perpetual problem, and determining what your solution looks like so that you can optimize for placement of that as well. Regulations, again, as I was talking about, DORA, not the Explorer over in Europe, definitely drove a number of regulations. There's another data regulation over there with their AI Act and a number of other things that's gone through the EU Parliament. So if you're dealing with the EU at all, you know this in spades, but there's regulations like CCPA here in the US, and a number of others that are happening across the US, and CCPA is a California reg. There's Virginia has a similar reg, surprisingly enough, and there's probably more coming around privacy from a state level perspective. I think it's especially going to get driven as AI becomes more pervasive and people are looking to understand what data is being scraped. And then, kind of, not finally, but I would say obviously, calculating expenses and aligning, with budgetary constraints is always a good idea. And the fact that when you take a step back and look at all of the pieces that go into this, where am I best served? Where am I best served bringing this data from or keeping this data at? Because data has gravity. So when you start to get into that data layer, we didn't even kind of touch on that. That was the fourth one being invested on after hybrid cloud. There's a big push on there. Do I, bring everything to the cloud? Do I have everything on-prem? And how do I align that? There's a lot going on in that space. In particular, you have a number of things that happen with things like Iceberg and open table formats. That's going to allow you to do querying across there. When you think of that, you're not moving the data, but you're bringing data. There's a lot of security architecture that needs to go into place. There's a lot of different uh, additives to that to make it scale and to make it not latency sensitive. I think you'll see a lot of AI going to regional data centers, not necessarily of the big hyperscale kind, because there's a lot that needs to be done locally with quick connections to data, and that may be partially on premise. And I think that is where, again, picking a company that understands the networking aspect of it becomes a way that you can actually optimize your cost structure as well. I kind of told that little story of major US uh, entertainment company, and I can tell you that they were shocked at, by leveraging a third party service provider to do that and moving some of their data through that service provider's infrastructure. They were able to significantly lower their costs. So it's one of those things that's great. So with that, that's my face again. That's my contact info. Feel free to reach out. Again, LinkedIn. I'm still on Twitter or X or whatever the hell it's called, and active all over the place. Or drop me a line at email. And also, I know John's back here, and I'll let him kind of talk to you. It's like an action-packed day here, John. I love this. It's
Yeah.
a lot
Thanks for,
going
as
on.
always, for your insight, Rob. I've been blasting you on LinkedIn, kind of getting your hot take on every part of your presentation. So I appreciate it. Lots of great data in there. The one thing I'll kind of mention on is like the security and open source is really interesting because like when Log4j hit, was that 3 years ago? The open source community had it fixed faster than the companies that used Log4j, which when you look at the companies that use Log4j, it was pretty much everybody, like every load balancer, firewall, everybody had it, and they lagged probably a good 3 to 6 months behind the whole open source community. So there is, I think, some shifting and some changing, in the security space. I think it's becoming a lot more, focused for the community.
I agree. I totally agree, and I think to your point, I mean, both of us have been around this world for quite a few years, and I think that when you look at the lineup you have here, I think the insights that are going to come on next that go even at next level down and deeper, and some of the insights, again from your CIO friends and the landscape and what's happening with them, kind of will help set the tone for people, because it is, the only bad strategy is not having a strategy when it comes to hybrid and multi-cloud.
You're right. And when you get lemons, you make lemonade. And that's I think what we're all trying to do here and we're all trying to evolve. And so you're right. We have an action-packed day. We have David Humes in a few minutes going. So I'm going to release everybody here quickly. But he has an awesome customer talking about their repatriation and what they're doing and how they're focused on it. We have all kinds of cool stuff on Open Cloud. And then what's really exciting for me is Nutanix coming on to show their multi-tenant environment. And I don't know if you've even seen it as an analyst yet, but I'm super excited to see what they're doing. They are making hay, and they are definitely making lemonade in this crazy cloud world that we're in right now. We have microservices 101. So you talked a little pets versus cattle. Shout out to Randy Bias. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to have a whole bunch of demos with Taylor Greiner and team, and then some Q&A at the end of it. So thanks everybody for attending our first session, our opening of the Cloud Advantage Virtual Summit, and stay tuned for a lot more content and action, and jump over to see David now. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.